Welcome to CineCynics.
I'm Craig.
I'm Mark.
And only in Hollywood could a Jewish guy become the head of the mafia.
Despite earlier reports of Steven Spielberg's Robopocalypse being delayed indefinitely, the film is actually not dead, but merely delayed for the foreseeable future due to financial concerns, and so that the script can be reworked.
Yes, and this sounds very exciting because he's not only for financial reasons, but he's also doing it to make the story more personal. And I think that will make you more invested in the story and the characters. And because if you go too epic and broad in scope, you lose a little bit of that, i.e. Michael Bay.
Yeah, this is nothing new for Spielberg, at least the last decade or so. It always seems that he has a few projects on his plate, and then he chooses one, and it seems to take several years before it completely gets off the ground, but it's always better for it. So I'm okay with this.
So it looks like the Nolan brothers are working on their new film, Interstellar, which is going to involve time travel, wormholes, other dimensions. It sounds pretty cool, so I'm excited about it, but there's not a lot of news about it yet.
From the little news that we did get about Interstellar's plot, it seems like another one that's right up Christopher Nolan's alley. And like everything else he does, this is something else that I'm eagerly anticipating. So the nominations for the 85th Annual Academy Awards have just been released, but there have been some noticeable snubs.
Yeah, especially in Best Director category, I have right here in front of me. Catherine Bigelow, Tom Hooper, and Ben Affleck were not actually nominated. They were nominated for Best Picture, but they weren't nominated for Best Director.
It's always an incredibly strange thing when a picture goes up for Best Award, but the director goes unnominated.
Yeah, and the reason why it's a Best Picture nomination is because of the direction.
Mostly.
I mean,
yeah.
I mean, he's the head of the ship. I mean, he's driving this movie forward.
And all of these movies had incredible buzz this year. This seemed like these were the ones that were going to sweep the awards nominations, and yet these people are somehow out.
And not necessarily to say that the Wachowskis should have been nominated, but, you know, it would have been nice to see a nomination for them because they did a pretty amazing job with Cloud Atlas.
And of all the directors on the list, I really don't see how Catherine Bigelow did not get another nomination. The 30 Dark Zero was even better than The Hurt Locker.
And also, Quentin Tarantino didn't get nominated for Best Director, which is a shame. And the only person that actually got nominated for the movie of Django Unchained was Christoph Waltz for Best Supporting Actor. They totally disregarded Leonardo DiCaprio's amazing performance.
Yeah, I really don't know what their thought process was. But, you know, I mean, you had all of these wonderful performances in Django Unchained, but DiCaprio was the one that really stole the show.
Yeah, and especially in that one scene, I know you'd hate to ruin it for people watching the movie, but he really cut his hand and rubbed his real blood on Kerry Washington's face in that whole scene in the dining room.
And that takes real devotion.
Yeah, especially when you're in pain because you just severed an artery. Actually, one snub that I'm really kind of disappointed about is The Sessions' John Hawkes. I've been hearing a lot of really great things about The Sessions. Helen Hunt got a Best Supporting Actress nomination, but John Hawkes didn't get a Best Actor nomination. And apparently he was absolutely amazing in this movie. I haven't seen it yet, but I've been hearing so many great things about his performance. I mean, he plays a guy who has polio and he's in an iron lung. I mean, come on. And he brings humor and apparently to the role. I mean, this is all things I've been hearing. It's a very humorous movie, but it also has a lot of dramatic impact. So how can you not nominate him? Anyway.
And also, Javier Bardem in Skyfall didn't even get a nomination for Best Supporting Actor. And if there was ever a Bond villain that deserved to be nominated, it would be him. He was the epitome of the Fleming Bond villain, ugly both inside and out, and his performance was absolutely scary.
Yeah, that was a shame. So there was another big snub for visual effects was Cloud Atlas. I personally thought the visual effects were pretty amazing in Cloud Atlas.
It was I mean, it definitely was probably the most visually stunning movie of the entire year.
The Dark Knight Rises didn't get a single nomination in any category, which is a shame because for the amount of effort and the scope of the movie, it definitely deserved a Best Picture nomination at least.
Yeah, I mean, and if not, then for some, categories for technical achievements, but, nonetheless, no nominations. This isn't exactly surprising considering that The Dark Knight, which was probably a more intact film, didn't receive anything. except for Heath Ledger's Joker, which he won for and deserved. But if The Dark Knight didn't get nominated, there was no chance for The Dark Knight Rises getting anything.
And one big snub of a movie that I saw was Looper, directed and written by Rian Johnson. That should have at least got an original screenplay nomination, because, I mean, for you to put time travel into a movie and to make it cohesive and understandable and make it really cool, that takes a lot of effort as a screenwriter, and I don't think time travel has been done that good since Back to the Future. I think Back to the Future has some of the best time travel stuff in a movie.
With our review of the new movie Gangster Squad on this week's show, I thought it only appropriate to share with you one of my all-time favorite films about another group of famous gangbusters, The Untouchables. Directed by Brian De Palma, the film stars Kevin Costner, Robert De Niro, and Sean Connery in the role that finally won him his then long-overdue Oscar. In Prohibition-era Chicago, a town run by the infamous mafia legend Al Capone, where crime runs rampant and illegal booze flows freely, federal agent Elliot Ness is sent in to wage war against the criminal underground. However, the city's corruption is deeply systemic, and Agent Ness's efforts are met with a lot of initial failure as informants deep within the municipal government tip off the bad guys to every planned raid. That is, until he meets Jim Malone, an aging police officer uncorrupted by the town's nefarious elements, who shows Ness the Chicago way of getting things done. Virtually every character in The Untouchables is fleshed out in an extraordinarily human way rarely seen in movies, let alone movies being made today. There is not one protagonist in the film that you don't end up caring deeply for before the end of it. You really get to understand just who these men are, the sense of justice and morality that drives them, and the extreme burden they've placed upon their shoulders as they take on the full weight of Chicago's corruption and prepare to take their fight to the bitter end. And though it comes at a deeply personal cost to the characters, the ending of The Untouchables is perhaps atop the most triumphant and emotionally cathartic in all cinema history. When the credits roll up, you're left feeling like there truly is some good left in this world.
Chinatown, directed by Roman Polanski, stars Jack Nicholson, Faye Dunaway, and the legendary John Huston. Jack Nicholson plays private detective J.J. Gittes, hired by Evelyn Mulgrew, played by Faye Dunaway, to spy on her husband. What starts out as an investigation on a cheating husband soon turns into a complex web of deceit, corruption, murder, and incest. The lighting, camera work, and dialogue that cuts through the air like a knife are some of the reasons why it's considered to be one of the best noir films of all time. The cast delivers great performances without even the hint of a misstep. With such an intriguing plot with many twists and turns, you're never lost. It's woven in such a way that isn't convoluted, and it makes sense for that time period in which it was set. If you've seen it, watch it again. If you haven't, buy the damn thing, because Jack Nicholson delivering some of the best dialogue I've heard in a movie deserves more than one viewing. And who doesn't like to see Faye Dunaway get slapped around?
Gangster Squad, directed by Ruben Fleischer, stars Josh Brolin, Sean Penn, Emma Stone, and Ryan Gosling. Set in post-war baby boom Los Angeles, crime boss Mickey Cohen runs the show, and it's up to Officer John O'Mara and his hand-picked team to go undercover and take him down.
First things first, we're going to talk about all the good things we liked about this movie, which was the cinematography, and it was very entertaining. A lot of the shots were pretty good. I mean,
they did an absolutely beautiful job of recreating all the glamour and glitz of that golden age of Hollywood. Like, you really felt like you were there, even down to the smallest details.
Oh, yeah. And the cars and the women, especially the women.
The clothes, the hairstyles.
Yeah, it did look phenomenal. Visually, it was very,
very
nice.
High production values. It was a very entertaining movie, and there was a lot of on the edge of your seat compelling action that kept your attention throughout the span of the movie. And the performances by the main cast also were very enjoyable.
I mean, for the most part, Josh Brolin's character, Emma Stone, Ryan Gosling, and Sean Penn. Yeah. I don't think so. I think he was a little bit over the top in a lot of the movie. There was maybe one or two scenes that I can think of that he was phenomenal, that he really was playing into that character, and then everything else just seemed like a cardboard cutout of a LA gangster from that era.
Yeah, I mean, I have to disagree a little bit. I actually thought for most of the movie, Sean Penn was actually really good. I mean, it is Sean Penn, but beyond that, I do feel like he invested a lot of time in crafting these characters. There were some moments where it seemed like he did kind of fall back on maybe the typical, almost like 1930s, 1940s era Hollywood movie gangster, but other times watching the screen and you really felt an utter fear of him. Like you could just feel the presence of sheer violence.
Yeah, especially the fear is like all these characters that mess up that are under Sean Penn's character, Mickey Cohen, are always like saying, "Thank you, Mr. Cohen." Things like, do these guys really think that they're gonna get away with up his
all of the all the hapless goons and boobs that are in his employ, who mess up in one way or another, and they think that he's going to take pity on them, but they're all angling to end up somewhere.
Yeah, it's like when are you gonna learn? They did that way too many times, though. I feel like
maybe, but it was still somehow satisfying each time. The best lines, however, I think went to Ryan Gosling in this movie. He really had some great one-liners and snappy, like era-appropriate dialogue. And like they got down all the lingo and the slang.
Almost similar to Kevin Spacey's character in L.A. Confidential, where he was like this Hollywood guy and like he was in the limelight,
bigger than life,
and...
but not necessarily. Yeah, but not in the same famous way. But he was famous to those who knew him.
Yeah. Like he was he almost like was playing a character that was cooler than who he actually was.
Yeah.
And the dramatic element of people coming together to fight against corruption and just fighting against the mafia itself, I mean, that was pretty compelling, and it's been told in other stories.
Yeah, this is a typical thing that you see in movies of this type, and we've seen it before in the Untouchables, but to this day, it still, remains a very, fascinating thing to see in movies, something that still remains compelling. But ultimately, when you begin to look a little bit more deeply at the Gangster Squad, you really see that this film does have a lot of flaws. Most of the characters were very poor developed and their motivations lazily written, and it seems like they introduced them to us with very little exposition about their background, and we're just supposed to buy into their crusade as to why they're doing
this. One of the elements that they tried to put with all the characters was that the fact that they all went to war in some capacity, which, I mean, is understandable in that period of time, 1949. A lot of people probably went to war.
Yeah, either in service of the country or against some cause or another.
But ultimately, that kind of falls short. We want to invest in characters that aren't just, wow, I went to war, fought for my country, and now I'm coming home to another war. Yeah, it's like, okay. I mean, it's like a very, very paper thin motivational tool that people use in Hollywood, and it wasn't very satisfying with the characters, because I wanted to like Josh Brolin and Ryan Gosling and all these other. I wanted to like all the other characters. Josh Brolin and Ryan Gosling were probably the most likable characters out of the bunch,
and the ones that were most developed.
Yeah,
but you had a lot of other great actors in that ensemble: Robert Patrick, Giovanni Ribisi, Michael Pena,
Anthony Mackie from The Hurt Locker,
right? And
Nick Nolte.
Yeah, and they did absolutely nothing with these characters. Really,
it was so disappointing, because you have all this great talent surrounding this movie, but yet you're not using them to their full potential, which was very, I don't know, it didn't feel right.
And this seems to be a problem not only isolated to just Gangster Squad, but to most Hollywood movies today, where the screenwriters don't really seem to put enough effort into really crafting the characters and explaining why it is that they do things. Like giving them motivation and history and things for us as the viewer to draw upon, to really get inside, to really place ourselves in their shoes, and to really empathize with them.
And let's talk about the abysmal third act of this movie. The first two were fine, but it just did not come together in that final act.
Yeah, for all its weaknesses, the first two acts of this movie were really good, and then it kind of just degenerated through a series of poorly exposited plot, if not altogether massive plot.
When
holes.
when one of the when one of the goons has to explain how they found a certain thing that moves the plot along, that is terrible screenwriting. Anybody who knows screenwriting knows that exposition in dialogue is not the way you tell a story.
I didn't even catch. It was such a quick line that basically that the whole third act of the movie hinges on, that explains it, that I didn't even catch it the first time, and I had to go back and ask him because I thought it was just a massive plot hole. Turns out that it isn't. Yeah.
You're not trying hard. You're just trying to throw something in there to move the plot along, and that pisses me off.
If it has to be explained in the dialogue, it's basically a plot hole as far as I'm concerned. It's also no secret that the ending of this movie had to be seriously retooled after the Colorado shooting that took place earlier in 2012 because they felt like the scene that we saw in the trailer with the shootout in the movie theater would be hurtful to the survivors of that. And I can't help but wonder if this movie suffered because of those reworks. It just seems...
Yeah, it could have been postponed. I mean, I can understand the sensitivity of people during that time, but if they just postponed the movie and left it to come out after the fact of the shooting, and it's kind of left people's memory now, and there was another 2 other shootings that happened recently, so it's I don't know. I think it would have benefited just from a postponement instead of a complete revision of the movie.
No one's denying that it's an absolutely tragic thing that happened. And, far be it from anyone to really rub salt in the eye of the survivors. But it's another thing when we let the vision of art suffer because of the actions of a madman, because we're basically letting them win by scaring us into changing how we run our lives.
And I did not like the resolution between the protagonist and the antagonist, because you weren't invested in these characters and the stakes were not set high enough. You just did not feel that the stakes were high at all with any of these characters or the situation that Los Angeles was in. It just, you didn't feel that and you weren't invested. So the resolution, even the third act and the resolution at the end of the third act, it sucked.
Yeah.
And it's thrown together.
Not to mention that the actual resolution itself ended up being quite, cartoonish and comical.
Yeah, like Sean Penn's performance.
Gangster Squad had all the trappings of a great gangster movie, but ultimately fell very short.
Yeah, because of poor character development, bad exposition and dialogue, and just characters you're not invested in, and a story that didn't make the stakes high enough, or you didn't even care about the stakes. I would not recommend you go see Gangster Squad in theaters. I mean, there's enough there, but I don't know. If you really want to go see something this weekend, I guess go see Gangster Squad, but I would recommend you go see it on rented. Or
if this is a genre of movies that you really like, there is enough to keep your interest if you're so compelled to see it, but I would also say to wait and rent this movie. And with any luck, there may be a forthcoming director's cut of this version, which restores the original third act of the movie, which I would like to see, because the one we were presented with is really disappointing.
And if you like Cinecynics, rate, comment, and subscribe.
And tune in every Saturday for more movie news, recommendations, and reviews.
And a question for our viewers out there, what are your favorite gangbuster movies?